Blog Talk Radio.
Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. Broadcasting live presents Two Guys and a Bible with Don Preston and William Bell. Join us each week at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central as we bring you exciting, sound, challenging, and comforting messages regarding the end times. Thank you for tuning in today. Don Preston is the founder of Preterist Research Institute, or PRI. Don is a prolific author, having written and published 19 books, a host of audio and DVD studies, and is a debater and defender of the full preterist view. His websites are BibleProphecy.com, Eschatology.org, and DonKPreston.com. William Bell is the founder of AllThingsFulfilled.com Ministries and has a website bearing the same name, and has authored 3 books, audios, and DVDs. He has published hundreds of articles and recordings. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two Guys and a Bible broadcast with Don Preston and William Bell. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is William Bell. Welcome to Two Guys and a Bible right here on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust. It is a delight to be with you today. I'm looking forward to our time together, along with Dr. Don Preston, who is with us in the studio. Don, how are you today? Hello, Don. Can you hear me?
Sorry about that. Evidently I accidentally hit my mute button. Sorry about that. But, very glad to be here as usual, getting all geared up for Preterist Pilgrim Weekend, which starts, as a matter of fact, 1 week from this Thursday. And, boy, I tell you what, we're excited about it. Of course, you're one of our speakers, and we're always thrilled about that because you always present some great lessons. And we've got Daniel Rogers, who will be speaking to us. Daniel will be talking to us about Revelation. Also, Hebraic apocalyptic language. We've got Alan Bondar, who is the author of The Journey Between the Veils, a very, very popular new book, great book. We have Larry Siegel, who will be here once again. Larry has spoken at our conference, many, many times in the past. And so we've just really, really got a great lineup of speakers for you. I will be speaking, by the way, on the Olivet Discourse as the foundation of New Testament eschatology. Okay, so who am I forgetting? I've got William Bell, Daniel Rogers, Larry Siegel, and Alan Bondar coming in. I believe that's all of the speakers. And our theme this year, folks, is back to the basics. As I was talking to Daniel Rogers on the phone, it was either last night or night before last, I told him that the approach that I want each one of the speakers to take is if you were going to sit down and if you were going to talk to somebody and introduce covenant eschatology to them and intrigue them and convince them of the truth of covenant eschatology, how would you go about that? Now, obviously, every speaker would have a different way to do that, and since the topics are the same are different, that means that each speaker is going to have to approach that topic and that theme from a very distinctive approach. So we're very excited about it. I know that the people that have corresponded with us, who have asked us about the conference, are very excited about the theme, and so. As I've told all of the speakers, we're going to follow the KISS rule. Keep it simple. Yeah, keep it simple. And that's our approach. And for those of you who have inquired, yes, indeed, we are going to offer the entire conference free of charge via live stream. Now, I don't have the link yet, but Chad Kenau, who will be in charge of setting all of that up, he is coming in on the 10th. He's coming in 2 days early to get everything set up, and we will be doing a mass mail-out, email blast, if you please. We'll be posting it on my websites. We will be posting it on Facebook. we'll be putting it everywhere that we can so that those who want to tune in for the conference, free of charge, live stream, you'll be able to do so. Now, let me say again, okay? I'm not bringing in Chad Kenoff free of charge. That's going to cost us a good bit of money. It's not cheap at all. So anything that you can do, if you're not going to be able to be with us, but you're going to watch us live stream, you do not have to contribute a dime, okay? It's not mandatory. However, just please keep in mind that we do have to pay for it, and it's very expensive to pay the expenses for the technology, the equipment, the travel, et cetera, et cetera. So anything at all that you can offer us as a gift in support of the live stream will be greatly appreciated. We've already received a couple of contributions toward that end. We're so tremendously grateful for that. But believe you me, it hasn't even come close to paying what it will cost us to get this accomplished, to provide it for you free of charge. Okay. Well, with that said, William, we have been talking about the signs of the end. And it all began when President Trump signed a declaration that the U.S. Embassy was going to be moved to Jerusalem in recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. That sparked off a round of riots in which numerous people lost their lives. Protests have been lodged at the UN, and on it goes. And, of course, the prophecy pundits have told us and reassured us that this proves without a shadow of a doubt that we are in the last days, that Donald Trump is the Antichrist. I have mentioned on this program how I've been absolutely amazed at the ongoing claims by people. You know, I produced 3 videos demonstrating that Donald Trump is not the Antichrist. The Antichrist was alive in the first century. Donald Trump has nothing to do with biblical prophecy. And the responses to that have been, well, many of them have been downright vitriolic. They have been angry. They've just been ugly. Others, obviously, have been responses by people who genuinely believe it, but they've been impressed with the videos that I made, and so they've asked questions and what have you. But just last week, once again, I was absolutely blasted by one poster on YouTube who said that, without any doubt whatsoever, in the extremely near future, Donald Trump is going to be revealed as the Antichrist. There's no doubt about it. Now, this individual did not quote a single verse. They did not engage in a single bit of even an attempt at biblical exegesis. Like I said, they didn't even cite a verse. They just simply said, he'll be revealed as the Antichrist. And I guess I'm under this naive impression that if you're going to make a claim about what the Bible teaches, you really ought to give Bible verse and try to justify your position from that Bible verse. But the main thing that is characterized 99.9% of all of the posters on YouTube objecting to my claims, objecting to my exegesis of Scripture, 99.9% of them have never even cited a verse of Scripture. No, not even one. They just made the claim. Well, Donald Trump in gematria works out to 666. Oh, good grief. William, I've just about become convinced that if you're good enough at math, if you're creative enough, you can make anybody's name turn out to 666. Don't you agree with that?
It sounds pretty accurate, I tell you, with what we hear all the time. Every year it's a different person, and they all add up to 666.
I'm pretty sure if we worked at it, Don K. Preston or William Bell would work out to 666. Now, just as sure as I say that, somebody.
Oh, they've already done it before.
Really?
Well, they've already claimed that we were the Antichrist or something to that effect.
Oh, well, yes, of course. That's certainly been done a number of different times with me, and I know with you as well. But I've never seen the gematria. I've never seen the calculations and the justification for the calculations. But that's where people get so creative, and I'm using that word in a very nice way. They get inventive, and it's just incredible how when people start pointing to Donald Trump, or it was Woodrow Wilson, or it was Ronald Wilson, Reagan, or it was Obama, or it was this person, or it was that person, and they completely and totally ignore the explicit statements of Scripture concerning the time, the events, and the location of the man of sin is given in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. William, do you think it's fair to say, I have felt this way, but do you think it's fair to say that 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 is in fact the foundational text for the doctrine of the man of sin?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, it is.
Okay. With that stated, now, folks, we've already gone over some things, and we pointed out that those in Thessalonica believed that the rapture, the gathering, had already taken place. Now, Paul corrected that, and he said it has not already taken place, because he says, do not let any man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come. Now, you'll notice that day shall not come is in italics. Well, what's interesting here is this is almost an elliptical statement, as virtually every single Bible translation has that kind of a rendering. You know, if a person goes to Bible Gateway and they look up 2 Thessalonians, I'm going to do that right now. Matter of fact. And going to see, I'm going to compare several translations. The American Standard Version says, let no man beguile you in any ways, for it will not be. Well, it would be an antecedent, or the antecedent reference would be that day. Okay? The Amplified Version, let no one in any way deceive or entrap you, for that day will not come. Whatever the BRG is, that day shall not come. The CSB, that day will not come. I've forgotten what the CEB is, but it's that day won't come. Some of these abbreviations are relatively new today to me. I guess I'm kind of out of the loop on some of these abbreviations. But the thing about it is, virtually all of the translations. Now, here's the English Revised Version. That day of the Lord will not come. So even though the term, that day shall not come, or the phrase, is in italics, it is understood that the force of the Greek language here is in reference to the day of the Lord. And thus, all of these translations, I mean, I'm looking down through, and there are over 56, 58 translations, and with one or two exceptions, okay, they all render it as that day will not come without, first of all, the apostasy, etc. And so there's little doubt as to what Paul is saying here based upon the force of the Greek text. So here they are saying that the day of the Lord had already come. They are saying the gathering, i.e. the rapture, had already come. And by the way, I think this is a very important point. I'd like to get your input into it. There are some who like to argue that the Thessalonians were saying that the day of the Lord, which they refer to as the entire period of time of the Jewish war, from 66 to 70 A.D. So they make the day of the Lord to be the 3.5-year war, the entirety of the war. I want you to comment on that first of all, but then they also delineate between the day of the Lord and the rapture, as if those are two separate and distinct events. But if the day of the Lord is the time of the rapture, if the rapture occurs at the day of the Lord, and if the day of the Lord began in 66 AD, then the gathering had to have occurred in 66 AD. The rapture had to have occurred in 66 AD. So if we take the view that they were believing that the day of the Lord had already occurred, then they were believing that the rapture had already occurred. Now, we went over the significance of saying that last week, and we covered that territory, but we didn't cover this particular aspect. So first of all, what is your response to those who say, well, the day of the Lord is the entire 3.5-year period of the Jewish war, and that the rapture and the day of the Lord can be distinct from one another?
Excuse me. Well, I don't think that we could. Excuse me. That's what was happening. I had something caught in my throat just as I was about to speak. John writes, for example, in Revelation 1 and verse 9, I was in the Spirit, or is that verse 10? I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. And he certainly was not talking about a 24-hour day from that perspective. At the same time, you have in Hebrews 10, which was a few years prior to 66, where he says they saw the day approaching. When we look in the Old Testament, and for example, we could even take the day of trial in the wilderness, you could see that there is an epoch or time for the Lord's day. And I believe that's what John had in mind when he said in Revelation 1:10 that he was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and that it was not, a single day. And so from the perspective that we take it from the time that God's wrath began to be poured out on Israel, is what I would see as a more accurate, concept of it. Now, in terms of how specific we could be about that, I'm not, I don't have an opinion about it at this time, but I certainly would not see it as a 24-hour day, but as that epoch of time where God's wrath is being poured out, and we know that occurred over a period of time. And so if that were the case, as you were saying, we would have the rapture occurring at that time as well. And I don't see how it could be avoided that if there were a rapture from the perspective that people are arguing, that it would have to have occurred. And so I think that's one of the problems with that particular view and issue as we look at it.
Well, I agree.
So those are my thoughts.
I believe. Yeah, I think it's accurate to say that the day of the Lord was not a 24-hour period. Now, Jesus did refer to his coming as that day and hour. So I believe what he was talking about was the climactic, the closing event, as it were, of the day of the Lord. But I certainly agree that the term day of the Lord is not necessarily restricted to a single 24-hour day. It's the period of time allotted by God for the outpouring of his vengeance. And when you look at Revelation chapter 11, the city of Jerusalem would be trodden down for 42 months. And Luke's account of that, Luke chapter 21, verse 24, the city of Jerusalem wouldn't be trodden down by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles were fulfilled. Well, the times of the Gentiles is the time for the Gentiles to destroy Jerusalem. The destruction of Jerusalem is the day of the Lord. But the Gentiles were not allotted one single day, to destroy Jerusalem. It was the 3.5-year war. And so I think that's an absolutely valid observation to make, that the day of the Lord is, in fact, a period of time. I also believe, however, that allotted period of time had a climactic event to it, a climactic that day to it, that would consummate the day of the Lord. Now, we may not know, especially standing 2,000 years removed, we may not know what that climactic event was in the counsel of God and in the mind of God, but nonetheless, we can certainly associate it with the given period of time, again, Luke chapter 21-24, that God had allotted for the Gentiles to destroy Jerusalem. That's the day of the Lord. That's the time God designated. And so, I believe that that's a perfectly valid observation. But that raises the issue. Okay, if the day of the Lord is an extended period of time, even 3.5 years, but if the Thessalonians believed that the day of the Lord had come, it doesn't say, and this I think is important, Paul doesn't say that the Thessalonians believed that the day of the Lord had begun. He would have used a different word based upon genetai. He could have used an aorist active or an aorist subjunctive, but he didn't do that. He used a perfect tense, has come and is present. And so there would be a distinction if Paul simply meant to say, some of you are saying that the day of the Lord has begun. That's not what they were saying. But not only that, they were saying that the gathering, the episynagoge, was present. Now, if a person wanted to grant, for argument's sake, well, yeah, they were saying the day of the Lord had begun. Well, if they're saying the day of the Lord had already begun, William, wouldn't that mean that they were saying, as you indicated a moment ago, that they were likewise saying that the rapture had begun?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to, could I ask you to draw that out a little bit in terms of saying that from the perfect tense that the day of the Lord had come, were they believing that the climatic part of the day of the Lord had come, or were they looking at the fact that it was already underway, that they were somewhere in the middle of that day having come? And when I say the middle, I don't mean like in a 24-hour day. I mean from the standpoint that we just discussed,
right?
The 3.5 months that day of the Lord for the destruction of Jerusalem was going on.
3.5 years.
3.5 years. Where do you think they saw themselves with relation to that point?
Well, that's a really good question, and I don't know how to answer that unless we conflate it with 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 18 that we talked about last week. If they believe that the resurrection was already past, which is the force of the Greek of 2 Timothy chapter 2:18, and there's really no debate about the force of the Greek in 2 Timothy 2:18. If they believed the resurrection was past, then they believed that the day of the Lord was past and that the gathering was over. Now, that's the way that I would...
Yeah,
I'm sorry?
Ahead. Well, I was just going to confirm what you were saying, and that is that the perfect tense would indicate that it had come and that they were standing in the existing results of the day of the Lord.
Yes, exactly. I was going to develop that as the very next point, but okay, I wanted to conflate it. Yeah, I wanted to conflate it, first of all, with the 2 Timothy 2 passage, because, as I noted a moment ago, the translation in 2 Timothy chapter 2 is not even debatable. They were teaching the resurrection was past. Well, the resurrection is the day of the Lord, right? I don't know if anybody really denies that. So if they were saying the resurrection was past, then they're saying the day of the Lord is already past. And if the gathering is at the day of the Lord, which it clearly is syntactically and contextually in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and 3, then if if the rapture, the gathering, and the resurrection are synchronous events, and they most assuredly are, they happen at the same time, in other words. So if they're the same thing, and if those in Ephesus, 2 Timothy chapter 2, were saying the resurrection was past already, then they were saying that the rapture, the gathering, was already over. So I don't believe that there's any way that you could say that those at Thessalonica were saying that the day of the Lord had just begun. No, it had begun, it had arrived, they were standing in the consequence of it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what that would be saying. And, I don't know whether this point was on your radar as well, but you've already kind of touched on it. If the rapture had already occurred, from their perspective, it does not appear that they had an opinion that the rapture had anything to do with taking them off the earth. If so, they were all left behind.
William, in my
sense?
book, I think it's an incredible point. It's one I've developed over and over again. In my book, How Is This Possible? And in my book, Leaving the Rapture Behind. Those are two books. And folks, if you'll go to my website, donkpreston.com or BibleProphecy.com, I can't pay your shipping, unfortunately, because these books are inexpensive. And if I paid shipping, I would be losing totally. But here's the deal. In both of those books, William, I raised that very point. Because if it's the case that the rapture is the physical removal of people from the earth, they disappear. One Sunday they're sitting in church. This Sunday they're no longer there, and everybody's going, well, where's Brother Eleazar? Well, I don't know. His wife can't find him. His kids don't know where he's at. The threshing floor where he works, they haven't seen him all week, and he seems to have just simply disappeared. And again, the very point, if they believed that the resurrection was past, and if they believed that the rapture was already past, and they're standing in the results of the rapture, then what kind of an emotional and psychological state of mind must they have been in if they believed it was a physical removal of people from the earth? Because like you said, they're still very much alive in Thessalonica. They are still very much being persecuted on a daily basis by the Jews of the city, but they're still there. They're still alive. And not only that, they're writing to Brother Paul that they know is also alive. He's over there in Athens or Corinth. And so they send letters to him saying, hey, Brother Paul, the gathering has already happened. Now, I have asked the question in both of the books that I mentioned, why didn't Paul write back and say, excuse me, guys, would you just think about this for a moment? If the rapture has already taken place, what are you still doing here? And if the rapture has already taken place, what am I still doing here? And what's Timothy still doing here? What's Tychicus
and James,
all of my and James
Silvanus,
Peter,
John, Jude.
What are all of these other faithful apostles still doing here? But Paul didn't say a word about that. And so we absolutely have to deal with the perfect tense of the Greek in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And in spite of some who say, well, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 is a totally unrelated situation to that in 2 Thessalonians. I don't think that's feasible. I don't think that's tenable at all. I think that is just a theological invention to avoid the fact that the day of the Lord and the resurrection belong together. And if you say the resurrection, if you say the day of the Lord has already come, then you are in fact saying the resurrection has already passed. If you say the resurrection is already past, then you're saying the rapture is past. But if you're trying to defend the rapture doctrine, you can't have them saying and believing the rapture is already past. You got the entire church at Ephesus. You got the entire church at Thessalonica. You got those in Rome. You got those in Corinth, all of whom must have believed the rapture was already over. Would that not have caused utter chaos in the early church? If all of these churches would have believed that the physical rapture had already taken place and they're still there, where would we find in Scripture a single reference, a single text in which any early Christian church wrote about and said, oh my goodness, the day of the Lord has already come, and brother and sister so-and-so, they're gone. They're gone, but we're not. What's wrong with us? We don't find anything even remotely resembling that. Now, again, I would say that if an event like a physical rapture had occurred, if the early church believed that the rapture had occurred, how could there be such a silence about that? Now, in my book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, The Wedding of the King of Kings, I've got an extensive discussion on whether or not there was a physical, literal rapture in AD 70. And in that, I mentioned the following reality. The ancient Romans, as well as the Jews, were extremely, may I use the term, superstitious. When you examine the writings of Tacitus, Suetonius, Pliny, any of the early Roman writers, what you very soon realize is how given to signs, portents, omens, weird things, you see very quickly how they recorded that stuff. For instance, on different occasions, an owl, a bird, an owl, would light on the Roman insignia of one of the buildings, on top of the eagle. And these Roman historians wrote about this as an awful sign from the gods. Others might interpret it as a good sign, but the point of fact is, they were always on the lookout and commonly reported anything and everything that struck them as strange, anomalous, marvelous, unexplainable. So the question that I ask in my book, We Shall Meet Him in the Air, The Wedding of the King of Kings, is that from a purely Roman perspective, we're not talking about the Jews for a moment, but from the perspective of Roman historians who wrote about the first century events, who wrote about events of the time of Jesus, who wrote about events in the time of Paul, who wrote about the fall of Jerusalem. And by the way, let's not forget, there are even some Roman historians who mention the reported signs in the sky that appeared at the time of the siege of Jerusalem. Now, what's my point in all that? My point in all of that is to say, had there been a sudden disappearance of poof, all of these Romans are missing, and somebody might rejoin and say, well, who's going to miss a bunch of slaves? They're just runaway slaves. Well, let's not forget that in the city of Rome, for instance, there were some very, very prominent Roman citizens who were members of the church. The same at Corinth. We know of prominent individuals who were Roman citizens who were members of the church. And by the way, we know about Philemon, don't we? A citizen that was evidently fairly prominent and influential. He was certainly a slave owner. So to suggest that all of these, even some of these prominent Roman citizens who are listed as faithful Christians now in Romans and Corinthians, and all of a sudden they're just gone. And we do not have a single word recorded about such a sudden, mysterious, incredible event of hundreds, perhaps thousands, and who knows, perhaps even tens of thousands of Romans suddenly disappearing. So we don't find that in the Roman histories. Well, what about the Jews? Paul said the Jews seek after a sign. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, 20 and following. So the Jews were certainly more than familiar with the early church. After all, where did the early church often meet? In the synagogues. In Jerusalem, they went to the temple every Saturday, and there they worshiped. From Acts 2 onward, we see that taking place. So, the question is legitimate to ask, I believe, if the rapture was the literal physical disappearance of hundreds, perhaps thousands, perhaps even tens of thousands of Christians who suddenly disappear from the Jewish synagogues, who suddenly are no longer worshiping at the temple at Jerusalem. Why don't we find that in some Jewish writings? I mean, after all, Josephus was a man intimately familiar with the temple in the first century. He was a contemporary of Paul. Hey, Josephus mentioned Jesus, mentioned that some call him the Messiah. He was a worker of miracles. He talks about the followers of Jesus. Well, why didn't Josephus record the sudden disappearance of all of these Jewish believers? Why didn't he, in fact, hey, forget that they're Christians. We might even be able to extrapolate. We might be able to deduce. We might be able to put together the circumstantial evidence and say, well, he might not have called them Christians, but when you put the pieces of the puzzle together, they had to have been Christians. And Josephus said, poof, they were just gone. Hundreds of them, thousands of them, suddenly disappeared.
You know, there's another point, Don, that could be considered there. When you look at the fact that many Christians were prisoners as well in Rome, and when you look at just the scant evidence we have in the New Testament for those who were Roman prisoners, like in the 16th chapter of Acts, and even the reference to it in the case of Jesus' resurrection, when they paid soldiers to say that someone stole the body while they slept, the amount of accountability for the prisoners by Roman soldiers would definitely have been something that would have created all kinds of, I would say, all kinds of records, documentation, etc., as well as, other situations for the Roman government and for those prisoners. And yet no one would speak about something like that when a man was willing to kill himself because he thought that the prisoners had escaped. Can you imagine all of the prisoners that had been taken, both under, the Jews and Rome, et cetera, who were Christians, and yet not a word said about them as well. So that would be, to me, another point to consider regarding the fact that, these people are supposed to have escaped, without notice in the first century.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a fantastic point, and I think it's absolutely valid. We're sometimes told that silence demands a rapture. Well, I think on the other hand of that, silence in this regard demands no rapture, because how can you possibly consider the Romans with their penchant for recording every strange thing that happened? How can you look at the Jews, which were looking for signs from God? And I mean, after all, would the early church not have been telling their Jewish brethren, let me tell you guys, here in just a few years, those of us who are faithful Christians are just going to disappear. You're not going to have us around to persecute us anymore, because we're just going to disappear. Now, that stands in sharp contrast to what Paul actually said in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, when he said that at the day of the Lord, the Thessalonians would simply be given relief from that persecution by the Jews becoming the persecuted. He didn't say they were going to be given relief by being raptured. Why didn't he? If the rapture removes the faithful from the realm of persecution, why didn't Paul just simply say your relief will come by means of the tables being turned on your persecutors? They will become the persecuted. Instead of saying, hey, look, guys, in just a very few short years, you're going to be out of here. The Lord's going to remove you. He's going to rapture you, and you won't have to put up with all this persecution anymore. No, they would receive relief from persecution at the coming of the Lord when their persecutors became the persecuted. Not a mention, not a word about a rapture or removal. And that is tremendously significant.
There's another little point to consider regarding the instructions that they were given after Paul wrote to them. And this is in 2 Thessalonians as well, chapter 3. As you know, with the rapture doctrine taught by J.N. Darby and others, there were many people who were being told to, quit their jobs and to not pursue anything in the future, basically to just kind of sit around and wait. And that's been the behavior and the conduct of some, in recent times, where they were waiting on the Lord to come, putting on robes, white robes, et cetera, and going up on housetops and on mountains, et cetera, to wait for the Lord, and basically abandoning all the natural responsibilities of life. Yet Paul, having written to the Thessalonians, told them that they were to be quiet, do their own business, and they were to work. And if they didn't work, they shouldn't eat. So he didn't tell them to abandon the natural things of life as a result of what they had believed, and even in view of the coming of the Lord. He told them to continue to do the things that they needed to be doing. And so that's another indication that they were not laboring under some, future escape from the earth.
Well, it's a great point. Okay, so, William, here we have then Paul writing to the Thessalonians who believed that the rapture, the day of the Lord, had already occurred. I want, if we have anyone in our audience, whether listening live or those who might listen in the archives, I want you to consider this. If the rapture was supposed to bring the church age to its end, I pointed this out last week, but let me make the point again. If the rapture brings the church age to an end, then what is being suggested here is that from 33 AD, which we will simply use as a convenient number for the establishment of the church, so if the church was established on 33 AD, then in 52 AD, the Thessalonians were believing that the church age had already come to an end. Now, William, that to me flies in the face of the fact that when the angel was talking to Mary in Luke 1:32 and 33, it says, "To him shall be given the throne of David, and of his kingdom and of his reign there shall be no end." How in the world can anyone suggest that the kingdom of Christ, sitting on the throne of David, would only last for 17 years? Now, let's not forget, Paul was emphatic. In Acts chapter 13, 33 and following, Paul said that Christ had already been given the, quote, sure mercies of David, unquote. Well, what are the sure mercies of David? The kingdom. So let's make no mistake here. Christ had already sat down in the heavenly places on the throne of David. He was ruling and reigning from the right hand during the interim period of time until all of his enemies would be put under him. When the last enemy would be put under him, he would join the Father on the throne and rule and reign forever and forever. Revelation 11:15 and following, Revelation chapter 22 and verse 3. So, once again, how could it be possibly proposed, when talking about the kingdom of Christ, which shall never be removed, never go out of business, never cease to function, how can it be proposed that the Thessalonians believed that the rapture, which puts an end to the church age, how can it be believed that the church age had already come to an end 19 years after it had begun? I mean, to me, I'm not very good at math, but that math just doesn't work very well.
No, it's not very good at all. I mean, how are you going to bring that to an end? He says the kingdom has no end, and then, of course, they're going to end it within, as you say, 19 or 20 years. Just doesn't make very much sense at all, and just shows you how far fetched some of these concepts and these ideas are on this point. Also, when you think about this, this is an example, and I just wanted to throw this in. It's an example of what hyperpreterism is. We are often accused of that, but when you look at their claim that these things had already occurred, that's a definition of hyperpreterism, if they want to use that, because this would be, a coming that had occurred prior to all of the events that were supposed to take place would have happened. They would be saying that it had already occurred, and of course that's beyond the concept of the remaining verses of 2 Thessalonians, which is why Paul wrote to them to correct them in their understanding. So if you're going to argue something about hyperpreterism, then you certainly should be looking at something that occurs before these signs that Paul gave them in terms of what the coming of the Lord was all about, because that's precisely what they were doing at the time. Yeah, and the scholars call that over-realized eschatology, because they realized that's what Hymenaeus and Philetus were saying. They were saying it was over before it was even supposed to be over. That's what those in Thessalonica were doing. They were saying it had already occurred before it was even supposed to occur. And so that is over-realized eschatology. Now I want to go back, and I want to emphasize the point that I was trying to introduce there, and that is, folks, if 2,000 years ago, all right, 2,000 years ago, if the church at Thessalonica and at Ephesus, and we could certainly include Corinth in that, if they were already believing that the rapture had already occurred, what was it that caused them to believe that the day of the Lord and the gathering, the resurrection, had already come? Now, we've got to be able to give some kind of plausible explanation as to why they would have believed
that the day of the Lord had already come. Now, in my book, How Is This Possible?, I give a scenario or two as to how those people could have believed in any way whatsoever that the day of the Lord had already arrived and that they were standing in the fulfillment of that day. And the idea that I suggested is this. Number one, the only way in the world that they could believe that the day of the Lord had already come is if they believed in the Old Testament concept of the day of the Lord. And when I say the Old Testament concept, I mean the concept of the day of the Lord that is found over and over and over and over in the prophetic books. It is a day when, guess what, Yahweh, exercising his sovereignty, used one nation to destroy and judge another nation. When he did that, he was said to come. He was said to come in flaming fire. He was said to come with a shout. He was said to come with hailstones, fire, and tempest. He was said to come with a shout. He was said to come with the sound of the trumpet. And yet, not once did Yahweh ever literally, visibly, bodily come out of heaven. It was always an event that if an unbeliever looked at the event, he did not see a day of the Lord. He saw one army destroying another people. He saw one kingdom fighting another kingdom. And by the way, that's the concept found in Isaiah chapter 26, 10 and 11. But the believer, because it was the word of the Lord, because there was a prophetic word that had announced the coming day of the Lord, and boy, that leads us into an incredible discussion of the continuance of prophecy and a future day of the Lord. But we won't go there right now. But a day of the Lord in the Old Testament was virtually always announced by God sending his prophet to a people saying, you know, if you don't repent in 40 days, the Lord's going to destroy this city. That's what God did with Nineveh. When he sent his prophet, Isaiah, to proclaim and announce impending judgment on Egypt, Isaiah 19 and 20. When he predicted the coming desolation of Edom and Petra and Basra in Isaiah 34. On and on and on it goes. In the Old Testament, the day of the Lord was a judgment caused by Yahweh when he used one nation and their army to bring judgment on another nation. That was the day of the Lord. Now, back to something I suggested a moment ago. You know, William, if we have a yet future day of the Lord, this so-called end of time, don't we have the right to ask, where are the prophets? Or will there be inspired, infallible, authoritative prophets who are going to say, like Ezekiel did, the day of the Lord is at hand, when he predicted the fall of Jerusalem in BC 586, when he said the day of the Lord is near, it is even very near against Egypt at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, in Ezekiel chapter 29 and 30. So here are God's inspired prophets declaring the day of the Lord was at hand. So if we're going to have the greatest day of the Lord ever, a time-ending, earth-burning, cosmos-destroying event, do we not have the right to ask, will there not be inspired, authoritative, infallible prophets of God saying the day of the Lord is at hand? It's coming very, very soon. Now, you know, William, you and I both know we testify about it right here on this program all the time. Every couple of months or so, it seems, we have another false prophet jump up and say, "Oh, this is it, this is it, this is it. The day of the Lord is at hand." And we point out, no, this is not the end. Just the other day on YouTube, I've got to hurry here, a poster by the name of J-Days, a woman, posted and blasted me as a false teacher, affirming that we are in the time of the end. The end is going to be by September 2000. Let me see, what was that? 2020, I believe. I copied and pasted it in a file. And there's no question about it. She's got all the calculations done. And again, I'm a false prophet for denying it. And I wrote back and I said, are you willing to put your money where your mouth is? I'm telling you right now, the end will not come in 2020. And I told her, I said, I'm copying and pasting your prediction into a file. When the date comes...
know why it won't come in 2020, right? Go ahead and finish that statement. And
I guess I'm lost, William. Why will it not come in 2020?
Because it's supposed to happen next year, according to some others.
Well, excuse me.
Yeah, there's
okay.
a group out there, there's a group out there who believe that what they call the 400-year prophecy that started from 1619 is about to happen. And so in 400 years, which will end in next year, then we're supposed to have the end of the world. So I just wanted to put that in there just in case.
Okay.
And so now we
got
2 dates. So we'll see which one happens. But go ahead.
You need to send me a link to that one so I can save that one as well. So anyway, right. I informed this J-Days that I was copying and pasting her entire post. I was going to have it in a file. I'm going to save it. And when the date comes and nothing has happened, I'm going to post on YouTube. I'm going to do it nicely, but I'm going to call her out. And I'm going to ask her if she's willing to rethink her eschatology. Now, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago now, I was sent an email. A gentleman posted to me that September 2015 had it all figured out. The math was all done. It was, if the Word of God is true, he never ever said a single time, if I understand the Scriptures correctly. No, it was always, if the Word of God is true, if God is not a liar, the world will end in 2015, and here's what's going to happen. I've still got the article and the email printed out laying on my desk. Well, I responded to it, and I said, with all due respect to you, sir, your calculations are false. The end was in AD 70 in Jesus' generation, just like Jesus said it would be. And I said, when your date comes and goes, will you be willing to reconsider, to rethink your eschatology? Well, he wrote back a very courteous letter, and he said, I appreciate your response. I'm not looking for a debate, but my calculations simply are not wrong. If God is not a liar, and if the Scriptures are true, the end will be in 2015. Well, the date came, and it went. The world didn't end. The Great Tribulation didn't happen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So guess what? I sent him another email. I was very kind, in the most gracious, kind way that I could possibly say it. I said, I told you so. Now, I didn't use those words. But I said, now, I had mentioned to you that your prediction was false. Please give me your response, and are you willing to study with me? He wrote back very graciously, and he said, well, you're exactly right. I was wrong. My calculations are obviously in error. I've just simply got to rethink and to recalculate. And of course, I'm going, no, you don't have to recalculate. You just have to accept the Word of God as to when the end was supposed to be. But he promised me, he said, I've got to rethink, and I promise I'll get back to you. Well, here we are 3 years later, and I've not heard another word from him. But that brings us to the end of this program. And we have much, much, much more to say about this man of sin. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, a guy by the name of Zachary Bauer, with whom I had a radio debate. William Bell was the moderator. He is part of the New to Torah, a Torah observant movement. He has produced a YouTube video on 7 signs that we are in the last days. In the ensuing weeks, William and I are going to be examining and responding to Zachary Bauer's YouTube video, and we're going to demonstrate to you his abuse of hermeneutic, his abuse of proper exegesis, that he is completely guilty of ripping events, ripping predictions and statements out of their historical context and applying them to times and events completely and totally unrelated to what the biblical writers were talking about. So you want to be listening for that in the upcoming time. In the meantime, folks, don't forget, Preterist Pilgrim Weekend, July 12th through 14th, Ardmore, Oklahoma. Come be with us. In the meantime, good night, and God bless.
Thank you for joining the Two Guys in a Bible radio broadcast. On behalf of Dunn Preston and myself, we'd like to say, have a very pleasant day, and may God bless. Until next time, we'll see you on Fulfill Radio, a voice you can trust.